Have you ever wondered what it takes for a king to control a loaf of bread? Not the metaphorical kind, not power or wealth, but an actual, crusty, golden loaf sitting in the hands of a sleepy Parisian baker. You might think kings concerned themselves with wars or mistresses or wigs the size of small poodles. But in 18th century Paris, the thing that truly kept Louis XV's subjects restless at night wasn't gossip from Versailles. It was the price of bread. You open your eyes to dawn in Paris, not the postcard one with twinkling lights and artists by the Seine, but a damp, yeasty-smelling version where flour dust floats like fog over narrow cobblestone streets. You walk past a line of bakers, their aprons powdered like snow, muttering about inspectors and royal decrees. Someone sneezes into the dough. Someone else swears their oven has been cursed by the taxman. You're in the kingdom of loaves, and business is serious. The year is around 1740. Give or take a famine, Louis XV has decided that bread, the food of the people, must be regulated by royal order. Every grain of wheat, every rise and fall of a doughy lump is to be weighed, priced, and inspected. The king's officials, the police du pain, roam the city before sunrise, measuring loaves with metal rods to ensure they're neither too light nor too fancy. Bread, you see, must be humble. A baguette too airy is a form of rebellion. A man in a powdered wig shouts through the mist that he's found a baker underweighting his bread. The crowd sighs, not out of moral outrage, but because everyone knows what comes next. Fines, confiscation, maybe a few dramatic tears. You watch as the baker pleads that his scales are honest. They never are. Here's your first historical fact for the night. In 1740, the lieutenants general de police maintained strict control over Parisian bread prices and sizes. Inspectors even carried official rulers, called règles du roi, to measure the crust and crumb. Imagine a job where your boss tells you to go weigh baguettes until lunch. Here's weird cultural tidbit. Bakers were forbidden to sell warm bread. It sounds cruel, until you realize Parisians would fight over it. Warm bread, still steaming from the oven, was like the 18th century version of Wi-Fi. Essential, addictive, and chaos-inducing when unavailable. Historians still debate whether this obsession with bread control was a genuine attempt at social harmony or just royal micromanagement at its fluffiest. Either way, it set the tone for a city where even crumbs had rules. You pause at a bakery window where loaves rest like obedient soldiers. A boy, face smudged with ash, sweeps flour off the step and hums something about the king's bakers being blessed and cursed in equal measure. Someone laughs softly behind you, an old woman with a basket of yesterday's bread. The king may control the loaf, she says, but he can't control how we eat it. You probably won't make it through this day. Between the smells, the heat, and the endless weighing of things that should be left alone, you'll want to crawl into a flour sack and nap. But before you do, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps this sleepy corner of history keep baking. And if you're still awake, comment where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now let's ease into tonight's journey deeper into the kingdom of controlled crumbs. You follow the sound of hooves on wet stone, heading toward the market square. Paris, still waking, smells of dough and smoke. The bakers' guild houses loom like fortresses, each marked with a carved loaf above the door, a symbol of both pride and regulation. You spot a baker named Etienne, sleeves rolled, eyes the color of burnt crust. He's kneading dough with the grim focus of a soldier loading his musket. He catches your eye and grins faintly. "They'll check this one," he says, "so it better weigh like a sermon." You nod as though you understand, though you mostly just want coffee. But coffee, in this century, is an expensive novelty imported from Arabia, the drink of philosophers, not sleepy wanderers. Etienne tells you that every baker must keep a record book stamped with royal seals, listing the weight of every loaf baked that week. "If a single bread falls short," he mutters, "they fine me 2 days' wages." 2. He slams the dough down. It makes a sound halfway between thunder and despair. Here's tonight's major fact. Bread in 18th century France accounted for up to 60% of a poor family's diet. So when prices rose or loaves shrank, people didn't just complain. They rioted. The police du pain were less like inspectors and more like riot prevention squads in aprons. You stroll with Etienne to the communal oven, a great stone mouth breathing fire. Every baker in the district rents its heat from the city, since wood is too expensive for private ovens. You watch as women in shawls bring their dough wrapped in cloth, marked with initials to avoid confusion. The heat makes you dizzy. The air tastes like roasted wheat and wet clay. An old superstition floats around the oven. They say if you whisper your sins into the dough before baking, the fire will burn them away. Etienne winks. Some of us need bigger loaves than others. You can't help but smile. It's a joke, but also not. Bread and sin seem connected here. Both rise when unattended. Historians still debate whether Louis XV truly cared about the poor or if bread control was simply a tool to keep the peace. One minister reportedly said, "When the people have bread, they don't ask questions." It worked. For a while, you glance at a cart stacked with pain de 2 livres, 2-pound loaves stamped with the royal fleur-de-lis. The design isn't decorative. It's proof that the bread meets legal standards. Fake stamps were a crime somewhere in Paris. A counterfeiter is carving illicit lilies into dough, which must be the most delicate form of rebellion ever conceived. The oven roars again. Someone starts singing. A lullaby, oddly enough, to calm the anxious bakers waiting for their turn. The tune drifts through the smoke like a half-remembered prayer. You cross the Pont Neuf as morning settles fully over Paris. The city hums with a rhythm that feels eternal. The slap of oars in the river, the clatter of wooden shoes, the faint hiss of loaves cooling on windowsills. You can almost hear the city breathe. One long sigh that smells of yeast, smoke, and human ambition. You pause midway across the bridge to watch a barge float downstream. Its cargo? Wheat, the true currency of the kingdom. The sacks are sealed, stamped with the fleur-de-lis, and guarded like gold. You think of the irony. All this royal paranoia over a crop that can be undone by one bad rain. Your mind wanders to the people who weigh these risks for a living. The commis du blé, the wheat clerks. They keep ledgers so detailed they could bore a saint. One clerk once wrote an entire paragraph about a mouse found in a shipment from Bukes, a noble animal, alas deceased, found among the grains. He noted solemnly. You picture him writing it with exaggerated importance, knowing no one will ever care, and yet caring anyway. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In 1763, Louis XV's government created a centralized wheat market to stabilize prices. but it mostly stabilized outrage. Merchants complained, bakers protested, and the poor suspected the crown of hoarding grain to drive up prices. The city was, in short, baked to a crisp with tension. A faint drizzle begins, soft, misty, and annoyingly poetic. You pull your cloak tighter, though it does little good. The cobblestones glisten. The air smells metallic. A fishmonger yells at a cart driver who splashes her stall. The driver shouts back that bread's dearer than dignity these days. You don't argue. He's probably right. As you step into the Rue Saint-Honoré, you pass a bakery window displaying a tiny loaf gilded with gold leaf. Not for sale, merely for admiration. The baker claims it's an homage to the king. You suspect it's also a warning to customers. Don't even think about asking for cheaper flour. Then comes your obscure tidbit, a whisper from the archives. Some Parisian bakers, fearing accusations of fraud, used to keep witness loaves on display, one from every batch, preserved like a legal record in case an inspector questioned their honesty later. Imagine a pantry full of petrified bread, each loaf a silent witness in the courtroom of flour and fear. Historians still debate whether these witness loaves were truly kept or just a symbolic tradition. After all, nothing molds faster than sincerity. The drizzle thickens into rain, and you duck under an awning where a group of women gossip between baskets of rolls. They complain about the king, the police, and husbands who eat too much. One mutters that bread never rises right anymore, since they stopped blessing the ovens. The others nod sagely, as if theology were yeast. You buy a crust from one of them, stale, but safe. She eyes you. Not from around here, she says. You admit as much. Then be careful, she warns. The bread police fine foreigners twice as hard. You thank her, bite into the crust, and immediately regret it. It tastes like regret's older cousin. A cat brushes past your ankle, damp and unimpressed. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls for midday. Paris continues its endless balancing act between hunger and hierarchy. You walk on, the rain softening, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts. A boy sings a street rhyme about the king and his loaves. Something about bread too dear, hearts too thin. It doesn't rhyme perfectly, but it feels true. And as you turn a corner, you see it, the grand marble facade of the Bureau du Pain, the royal office where every crumb, crust, and complaint is recorded. You're about to step inside, though you're not entirely sure you want to. The smell of bureaucracy might be worse than wet dough. Still, curiosity wins. After all, this is where bread becomes law. Inside the Bureau du Pain, the air is thick enough to chew. Dust motes drift like lazy snowflakes over stacks of parchment, scales, and ledgers bound in fading leather. Every clerk moves at the pace of a slowly cooling loaf, deliberate, solemn, and just a little stale. You approach a desk where a man in spectacles balances a loaf on a brass scale. He squints, adjusts a counterweight, and sighs deeply. Too light, he says. Again. His assistant nods gravely, as though this single ounce of flour will alter the fate of the realm. He glances at you. You're not here to file a complaint, I hope. You shake your head. Just curious. He exhales. Half relief, half contempt. Then you're in luck. Curiosity isn't taxed yet. Here's your key historical fact. Each Parisian district had an official contrôleur du pain responsible for checking weights and prices daily. Records show that in 1 year alone, over 6,000 loaves were confiscated for being underweight. Bread crime, it seems, was no small matter. An apprentice hurries past, carrying a basket labeled Proofs de Fraud. Proofs of fraud. You peek inside and see a sad collection of flattened rolls and misshapen lumps. They look less like evidence and more like victims. The clerk continues his sermon. The king believes fairness lies in uniformity, he mutters, adjusting his powdered wig. But fairness, monsieur, has a strange taste when baked by decree. You nod, though you suspect he's been waiting all morning for someone to say that to. Then comes today's cultural oddity. Once a year, the Bakers' Guild was required to present an enormous ceremonial loaf, sometimes weighing over 50 kilos, as a tribute to the king's household. The loaf was paraded through Paris with trumpets and ribbons before being delivered to Versailles. Children followed the procession, chanting, "Long live the loaf." 1 year, the bread collapsed halfway there, leading to rumors that it was an omen for royal misfortune. Historians still debate whether the king actually ate any of those tribute loaves or simply admired them like edible statues. Personally, you hope he didn't. Royal appetites were dangerous enough without 50 kilos of symbolism. The clerk, still lecturing no one in particular, explains how every bakery must post its official price list at the door, written in neat black ink. Transparency, he says proudly, though you can barely read the handwriting. Outside, thunder grumbles. The storm has arrived in earnest now. You glance through the window. Raindrops streak the glass like tears. A wagon rattles past, carrying barrels of flour toward the royal storehouses. You ask what happens if bakers refuse inspection. The clerk's eyebrows climb. Refuse? They wouldn't dare. He lowers his voice. Last month one did. The police seized his oven. You blink. They took his oven? Carted it away like stolen property. Imagine a man standing in his empty bakery, flour on his hands, no fire to bake with. Tragic, really. He pauses, then adds with faint satisfaction, but order was restored. A faint chuckle escapes you, not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. Bread confiscation as public theater. Paris does have a flair for drama. You step back into the hall, the sound of rain now joined by distant thunder. The Bureau du Pain feels timeless, as if it could exist in any century that loves rules more than reason. A bored scribe scribbles notes at a corner desk. His quill squeaks. You glance over and notice he's doodling little loaves in the margins. Bureaucracy meets artistry. By the time the storm passes, Paris smells like damp grain and singed wood. The city glistens, not romantically, just wetly, like a loaf that's been brushed with too much egg wash. You walk along the Rue du Four, the street of the oven, where every second doorway hides a bakery, and every third baker hides resentment toward the king. You pause beneath a wooden sign carved with a loaf and crown, Le Pain du Roi. The irony is unmissable. Inside, the baker looks like a man who's been awake since the previous centuries. His hands are coated with dough so thoroughly that his knuckles might be permanent fixtures of bread. Bread inspectors came at dawn, he says before you can even greet him. Said my loaves were too beautiful, too luxurious. You look around. The loaves gleam golden, their crusts glossy, each one scored with a delicate pattern of leaves. They do look guilty of elegance. He shrugs. They find me for excessive artistry. That, right there, is your historical fact for this section. During Louis XV's reign, bakers could be fined or even imprisoned for selling loaves considered too rich, too decorative, or too fine in texture. The idea was that fancy bread encouraged envy among the poor. Paris, it seems, regulated both calories and emotions. He slides you a small roll, a plain one, out of defiance. Taste rebellion, he says, half smiling. You take a bite. It's dry, humble, oddly satisfying, like most revolutions in their infancy. Then comes the obscure tidbit. Some bakers, especially those near the Palais Royal, supposedly slipped secret notes inside loaves. Little scraps of paper carrying gossip or political jokes. They'd bake them into the bread and sell them to trusted customers. The rumor was that even the royal servants got their news this way. Chewing through satire with breakfast, historians still debate whether this was genuine subversion or just Parisian myth-making, the city's favorite pastime after complaining. The baker gestures to the back of his shop. See that oven? It belonged to my grandfather. He swore bread had a soul, said you could feel when the dough forgave you for over-kneading it. You can't tell if he's joking. With bakers, it's always both. He wipes his hands, leans closer. They say the king's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, sent her chef to study our loaves. Imagine the royal court wanting to understand us. You imagine it indeed. Satin-clad servants hovering near flour sacks, horrified by the concept of yeast. Still, the baker heads. They can't control taste. They can make laws about bread, but not hunger. You nod. Hunger is the one tax no kingdom has ever abolished. The bell above the door jingles as a boy enters, dripping rain onto the floor. He drops a few coins and asks for pain bis, the coarse brown bread of the poor. The baker sighs, but wraps it carefully, like a gift. Outside, the sun begins to break through the clouds. The puddles shimmer with reflected rooftops. Distorted yet familiar, you walk on, past the smell of flour and the hum of commerce. Paris looks gentler after rain. Or perhaps you've just grown accustomed to its contradictions. In the distance, you hear bells again. Not from churches this time, but from the carts of bread sellers calling out prices. 2 sous, fresh loaves. No fines today. You smile. Somewhere, Louis XV is being powdered for the morning, oblivious that his people are laughing through crumbs. You probably won't make it through this day either, but at least you'll be well fed in defiance. The afternoon grows heavy, warm, and slightly fermented, like bread left too long to rise. You wander toward Les Halles, the vast central market of Paris. Its chaos wrapped in commerce, with every sense assaulted at once. Shouts, smells, the slap of fish, the crack of cabbages. But the smell that dominates, always, is bread. Even here, amid the poultry and pickles, the scent of baked wheat reigns like perfume. You pass a stall where a young woman sells rolls shaped like small crowns. King's buns, she calls them, winking. They're lighter than his conscience. You can't help but laugh. Here's your historical fact. By mid-century, bread in Paris wasn't just food. It was an economy. More than 1,000 bakeries operated within the city walls, each paying taxes to maintain the price controls decreed by the crown. Some historians call it the first national food bureaucracy. Others just call it exhausting. As you drift through the crowd, a group of workers argue over flour quality. One insists that royal grain is mixed with chalk to stretch supplies. Another swears the inspectors water down dough samples before testing them. You suspect neither story is true, but both feel accurate. A very Parisian distinction. Then comes your cultural tidbit. Bread buyers in 18th century Paris often tested freshness by pressing their ear to a loaf. If they heard a faint crackle, it was perfect. If silent, it was deemed dead. Imagine an entire city tilting its head, listening to bread breathe. Historians still debate whether this listening test was truly widespread or just a poetic exaggeration from travel writers. But it's lovely enough to believe. You lean against a stone column, watching the dance of trade unfold. The bakers move like priests at an altar, their flour-dusted aprons fluttering as they weigh and wrap. A group of apprentices haul sacks of wheat from a cart, grunting in rhythm like a chant. Flour for the people, bread for the peace. One calls, though no one believes him. You overhear two older women gossiping. The king says he loves his people, one says, tearing her loaf in half. Then why does he make them eat half bread? The other shrugs. Love's cheaper than flour. You continue walking, past stalls of cheese, honey, and pears. Luxuries for anyone who isn't royalty. You stop at a bakery booth, where the baker's daughter is decorating loaves with sprigs of thyme. For luck, she explains, and to mask the taste of old grain. A dog steals a roll. The crowd cheers. For once, no one reports it. As you weave through the aisles, you feel the pulse of the market, a heartbeat beneath the chatter. The people here, you realize, aren't just selling food. They're surviving ritual. Every loaf represents trust that the oven won't betray, that the king won't decree another price change overnight. The afternoon sun tilts golden through the iron arches of Les Halles. Pigeons circle lazily overhead. Someone's playing a fiddle, and the tune mingles with the laughter of merchants. For a brief, drowsy moment, Paris feels content. You find a quiet corner near a fountain where the water trickles softly. A baker washes his hands, humming the same lullaby you heard near the communal oven earlier. Maybe it's the same man. Maybe it's just the city's favorite song. You close your eyes. The sound of bread being broken carries across the square like prayer, gentle, rhythmic, endlessly human. Somewhere, Louis XV's ministers are drafting new regulations for tomorrow's loaves. But here, in the heart of the market, no one cares. The people have what they need for tonight. And tonight, that's enough. Evening drapes itself over Paris with a heavy sigh, like a baker finally sitting down after a day of kneading. The air cools, the city exhales, and the smell of baked wheat gives way to something gentler, the mingled scent of ash, candle wax, and the faint sweetness of rest. You find yourself on the edge of the Ile de la Cité, where the narrow streets twist between bakeries and taverns. The ovens are cooling now, but their heat lingers in the walls, radiating into the night like stored sunlight. You walk slowly, guided by the rhythm of your own footsteps, and by the music of distant conversation. A woman sells stale crusts to feed ducks at the riverbank. A baker's apprentice, still dusted in flour, flirts shyly with a laundress. The bells of Notre Dame mark the hour with unhurried grace. You feel yourself sinking into the pace of it all. A city that never stops talking, but always at a whisper. Here's your historical fact for tonight. By the 1750s, the price of bread was adjusted weekly by the Royal Council. based on grain supply, a ritual so important that entire meetings of ministers were devoted solely to flour. Imagine a cabinet of powdered men in wigs, debating whether a loaf should cost 1 or 2 sous. Politics, reduced to crumbs. You pass a bakery where the shutters are half closed, but a small window remains open for the night customers, mostly workers, maids, and lovers sneaking home late. The baker, gray-haired and gentle-eyed, recognizes you as a wanderer. You've been walking long, he asks. Most of the day, you say. Then you'll need this. He hands you a heel of bread, wrapped in linen. Old bread for a new evening. You thank him. It's hard, but comforting. The kind of bread that holds a story rather than flavor. He smiles faintly. They say bread gets its mood from the baker. Mine's tired, but kind. You want to tell him that's the best kind, but the words don't quite come. Then comes your obscure tidbit. In some quarters of Paris, bakers used to whisper a small prayer before opening their ovens at dawn, not to God exactly, but to Saint Honoré, the patron saint of bakers. His image hung above many ovens, floured and smoke-stained, believed to keep the dough from collapsing. Historians still debate whether these prayers were sincere or just habit, but sincerity, you realize, isn't really the point. It's rhythm, repetition, the small rituals that keep people steady when everything else, even bread, feels unstable. You eat as you walk. The bread softens slowly in your mouth, tasting faintly of smoke and salt. It's not delicious, but it's honest. The night deepens, warm lights glowing in windows. From somewhere behind you, laughter erupts. Sharp, bright, human. You turn and see a group of apprentices playing cards beside sacks of flour. Their hands leave white smudges on every card they touch, as if even their leisure can't escape the day's work. You sit for a while. On a stone step, a cat curls beside you, purring like an oven cooling down. You watch the reflections on the Seine ripple with candlelight. It's quiet here, and the city's endless rules and inspections feel far away, as if, for a moment, bread belongs only to the people again. Somewhere out there, you imagine the king at supper, slicing his delicate brioche with a jeweled knife. They say Louis XV preferred his bread sweet, enriched with eggs and milk. It must have tasted like luxury and detachment. And still, you think the king eats bread just like everyone else, bite by bite, mouthful by mouthful, until it's gone. You lean back against the wall, eyes half closed, and let the river's sound lull you toward rest. Morning comes again, and Paris wakes with the stretch of a cat. The air feels rinsed, clean, carrying the scent of ash and milk. You find yourself wandering into a quieter district, the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where the city's craftsmen live. Here, bread is baked not for show, but for survival. You follow a trail of smoke and flour until you reach a narrow courtyard. A communal oven hums at its center, surrounded by women waiting with baskets of dough. They talk softly, half gossip, half hymn. The oven door glows orange, and the air around it trembles with heat. You take a place at the edge, unnoticed at first. Then a young woman turns to you, her sleeves rolled, hair tied with string. Yours isn't ready yet, she asks with a grin. I'm only watching, you admit. She nods. Then you'll see how we do it, without royal nonsense. Here's your historical fact. In poorer districts of Paris, communal ovens were often run by local cooperatives, small groups of families who shared costs, heat, and risks. These ovens were technically under royal supervision, but inspectors rarely bothered to visit. Too far, too smoky, too human. The women here move like a single organism, each tending her loaf, sharing scraps of cloth to mark whose is whose. One sprinkles a pinch of salt over her dough and murmurs something about protection from envy. That brings your cultural tidbit. Bakers and homemakers alike believed salt had moral weight. To bake without it, they said, was to tempt discord. Even poor households saved a pinch for every loaf, so no soul would go flavorless. Historians still debate whether this was a superstition or just good taste. Either way, it worked. You watch the young woman slide her dough into the oven using a long wooden peel. She looks over her shoulder. You city folk think bread's born in fancy ovens, but it's born here, between neighbors. Her tone isn't bitter, just firm. You nod. There's something deeply democratic in this place. Warmth shared, work shared, time shared. A boy darts between the women, chasing a chicken. Someone laughs so hard, they nearly drop their basket. The laughter spreads, the way laughter always does. Faster than hunger, faster than rules. One of the older women wipes her eyes and says, "My husband used to say, the king's bread never made him full, only mine did." Everyone chuckles, but the silence afterward feels tender, reverent. You sit by the wall, knees drawn up, and listen to the rhythmic crackle of the oven. It's the sound of patience, the same patience the city demands of its people. When the first loaves emerge, steam curls upward, fragrant and ghostly. The women fan the bread gently to cool it, though everyone steals a bite too soon. You're offered one too, warm and imperfect. The crust shatters softly beneath your teeth, and for a moment, you understand why Parisians risked fines for this forbidden warmth. It's more than bread. It's defiance that you can chew. You will linger as the women pack up and head home, the smell of wheat trailing them like memory. The oven door shuts with a dull thud, and the courtyard falls quiet again. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of the city call the hour, measured, predictable, royal. But here, the only rhythm that matters is the heartbeat of cooling loaves. You take one last breath of the warm air, heavy with yeast and soot, before stepping back into the street. Paris stretches before you again. Vast, tired, endlessly hungry, but still alive. You wander west through the waking streets, where the smell of coffee mingles faintly with bread, a scent that could make even cynicism feel hopeful. Paris seems softer now. The storm has washed its grime into the gutters, and the morning light glides along the Seine like melted butter. You pass the Pont Marie, where vendors sell yesterday's loaves at half price. A baker's boy hollers, "Cheap bread for expensive lives." His voice echoes down the quay. People laugh, but not because it's funny. It's just true enough to sting. A small crowd gathers near a bulletin board plastered with notices, price decrees, sermons, lost dogs. One new sheet catches your eye, an official proclamation from the King's Council. The price of wheat has risen again. You can almost feel the collective tightening of jaws. Here's your historical fact. In 1768, bad harvests across France caused wheat shortages so severe that even the royal bakeries struggled to meet quotas. The city was on the verge of panic, and Louis XV's ministers began ordering secret imports from neighboring regions to calm the markets. Of course, secrecy in Paris lasts about as long as warm bread. You listen as the crowd murmurs. No shouts, just that quiet, dangerous rumble of shared frustration. A woman sighs, "Let the king eat air then. It's cheaper." You walk on, past a bakery where the baker has chalked his prices directly onto the door. Each line a negotiation with fate. His wife leans out the window, shaking a flowery towel into the street. She meets your gaze. "People think we hoard grain," she says, "but sometimes I hide only so my children can eat." You nod, unable to answer. Hunger makes philosophers of everyone. Then comes your obscure tidbit. During times of scarcity, Parisians baked what they called pain de détresse, bread of distress. It mixed wheat with rye, barley, or even ground peas. Some versions were so coarse they were said to break teeth, yet people ate it with gratitude because hunger rewrites the dictionary of luxury. Historians still debate whether pain de détresse was truly a survival recipe or just a grim, bureaucratic term invented by officials who never tasted it. You suspect both. You buy a small loaf from the chalk door baker. It's darker than usual, heavier too. When you tear it open, the crumb smells faintly of earth, like the memory of fields that never recovered. You take a bite. It's rough, dense, stubborn, a bread that refuses to be forgotten. Further down the street, you hear a fiddle. A man plays near a tavern, singing a tune about the loaves of the king that turned to stone before reaching the poor. It's part joke, part lament. Paris has always known how to make tragedy rhyme. You find a bench by the river and sit, watching the boats move like crumbs on the current. A child runs past, clutching a roll as if it were treasure. Maybe it is. You think of Louis XV, elegant, distant, forever perfumed, and wonder if he knows that his people measure time not by bells or seasons, but by the weight of bread in their hands. The wind shifts. You pull your cloak closer. A gull dives for a crust someone has dropped, squawking triumphantly as it flies off. You can't help but smile. In this city, even the birds commit small rebellions for bread. The clouds thicken again, promising rain. You decide to move before the heavens. Test Paris's patience once more. The first drops fall as you duck into a tavern. One of those low, candle-lit rooms that smells of smoke, ale, and human history. The sign above the door reads, "Le pain perdu," which seems fitting. Lost bread for a lost evening. Inside, the patrons speak in murmurs. A few sailors, a handful of artisans, one bored scholar tracing circles in a spill of wine. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a voice like warm iron, greets you with a nod. "Rain's come again, eh? Sit. I'll find you something dry to chew on." She returns with a plate of toasted slices, swimming in milk and honey. Pain perdu, literally lost bread. You smile. Even here, nothing goes to waste. Here's your historical fact. The dish, pain perdu, or French toast as it's now known, was born in taverns like this one. A way to use up stale bread in the lean months. It became so beloved that even nobles adopted it, gilding it with cream and citrus peel. The people called it bourgeois revenge. You take a bite. It's soft, sweet, and tastes faintly of defiance. The innkeeper watches, arms crossed. "You'd be surprised," she says. "Even inspectors eat here. Bread's not political when it's soaked in honey." Then comes your cultural tidbit. Parisian taverns were often the secret gossip networks of the city. Bakers, merchants, even guards shared rumors over crusts and cups, everything from tax protests to royal love affairs. It's said that news in Paris spread faster on crumbs than on paper. Historians still debate whether the revolution that would come later truly began in salons or in places like this, where truth was toasted and swallowed between sips. A man at the next table clears his throat. They say the king plans to raise prices again, he mutters. Blames the rain. Always the rain. The others groan. Someone jokes. If the clouds were royal, they'd charge rent for shade. The laughter that follows is low, weary, and perfectly Parisian. You nurse your cup and watch the candlelight flicker across the room. The shadows sway like old arguments. Someone begins to hum, soft at first, then louder. That same tune again, the lullaby of the ovens. You've heard it in markets, in alleys, in courtyards. It drifts everywhere bread is made. Outside, thunder rolls over the rooftops. The windows tremble, but no one moves to close them. Rain patters against the panes like an impatient drummer. The innkeeper leans against the bar, watching the storm. My mother used to say, she murmurs, that thunder is just heaven's oven door slamming shut. You smile. Maybe it's checking if the world's risen enough. She laughs. The warm kind that comes from years of surviving nonsense. If that's true, Paris is still half-baked. You finish your meal, the sweetness lingering. For a brief moment, the city feels safe, a shelter from its own bureaucracy. When the rain slows, you step back into the street. The gutters gleam silver under lantern light. Water runs down from rooftops like melted glass. Somewhere, a baker's cart rattles over the cobbles. Heading home late, the scent of bread follows behind, faint but insistent, as if Paris refuses to fall asleep without it. You pull your cloak tight, your stomach warm, and walk on toward the next corner of the city, where hunger and history meet again. And in the distance, almost too soft to hear, the bells of midnight begin to ring. Paris at midnight hums like a sleeping animal. Not silent, never silent, just slower, softer. You walk through streets half lit by oil lamps, their glass trembling with the breath of the wind. The stones beneath your feet are slick and uneven, like the back of a loaf brushed with water before baking. You follow the faint music of night, the clatter of carts returning from markets, the whisper of river water against the quay, the low laughter of bakers still working the late shift. The smell of smoke and yeast has become the city's lullaby. At the corner of Rue des Lombards, you stop before a small shop with shuttered windows. Its sign reads, Boulangerie des Enfants Perdus, the bakery of lost children. An odd name, though you've learned by now that every Parisian name hides a story. The door is cracked open. You step inside. The baker is an old man, his back bent like a bow, his face half in shadow. The oven still glows faintly behind him, casting orange halos across the flour-dusted air. He glances up, but doesn't seem surprised to see you. Can't sleep? He asks. Just walking? He nods. Same thing. Here's your historical fact. Many Parisian bakeries stayed open through the night, their ovens running in shifts to supply bread for dawn deliveries. It wasn't charity. It was survival. Bakers often lived above their shops, sleeping in short bursts between kneading and baking. The night belonged to them. The old man gestures for you to sit on a wooden stool by the oven. You can keep me company, he says. The bread won't mind. He works slowly, folding dough with deliberate care. The silence between his movements feels sacred, as if the whole city is holding its breath. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Some bakers, he explains, believed that dough listened. They avoided arguing in front of it, fearing the bread would absorb tension and refuse to rise. My wife used to scold me quietly, he says with a grin, for the sake of the dough. Historians still debate whether that belief came from religion or from simple respect for the craft. Either way you decide, there's a strange kindness in treating bread as if it has feelings. The old man turns a loaf with his bare hands, unbothered by the heat. They say the king controls every crumb, he murmurs, but he's never baked a loaf in his life. If he had, he'd know. You can't rush fermentation. Power doesn't make yeast rise faster. You laugh softly. He smiles, though it's weary. Outside, a bell tolls once, then twice. He pulls the bread from the oven. The crust crackles like firewood. Steam curls into the air, ghostly and fragrant. Smell that? He asks. That's forgiveness. You take a piece when he offers it. Still too hot, too alive. It burns your tongue slightly, but you don't care. The warmth spreads through you, steady and grounding. He wipes his hands on his apron. Every loaf I bake is a prayer, he says. Not to God, exactly, to tomorrow, for it to come quietly. You sit there for a long time, watching the glow fade inside the oven. The city outside hums on, but here, in this tiny bakery, time seems to fold like dough. When you finally stand to leave, the baker nods. Take care on your walk, he says, and if you dream of bread, make sure it rises. You step out into the chill. The stars above the Seine blink faintly through a haze of smoke, as if unsure whether to shine or sleep. Paris continues to breathe, slow and steady, like a loaf cooling on the table of the world. Dawn again, pale, reluctant, and beautiful in its tiredness. The city feels heavier now, as though even the stones have absorbed the weight of bread and worry. You make your way toward the Grenier à Blé, the royal grain warehouse that looms over the right bank like a fortress of flour. The building is enormous, circular, imposing, guarded by men with halberds who look far too serious for a job involving wheat. This is where the king stores the city's grain reserves, where shortages are counted and control is quietly enforced. You approach the gates just as a convoy of wagons arrives, loaded with sacks marked with royal seals. The guards shout orders, clerks scribble notes. It's less a scene of abundance than one of anxiety. Every sack represents a balance between peace and panic. Here's your historical fact. The Paris grain market, completed in 1763, was among the first centralized systems of food management in Europe. It allowed the monarchy to monitor every grain entering the city, a marvel of organization that also made corruption incredibly efficient. You managed to slip inside under the pretense of curiosity, the universal passport. The interior smells of straw and metal. Clerks weigh and record, their quills scratching endlessly. You glance at a ledger filled with neat columns, numbers upon numbers, like prayers in bureaucratic form. A supervisor notices you lingering. Mind the dust, he says curtly. It gets in your lungs. You nod. Does it ever leave? He laughs dryly. Not if you live here. He gestures toward the highest shelf, where rats scurry like tiny accountants. They eat better than we do. But don't tell the king. You move deeper into the warehouse, the sound of shuffling feet echoing through the vaulted space. Sunlight filters through a high oculus, striking the air into gold-dusted beams. It's strangely beautiful, divine even, in a place meant only for storage. Then comes your cultural tidbit. Some workers here wear small wheat stalk amulets around their necks, a folk charm said, to protect them from famine and misfortune. The grain sees all, one man tells you solemnly. So you show it respect. Historians still debate whether such charms were tolerated by the crown or quietly mocked. You imagine both. The same officials who record every ounce of grain probably still touch their amulets when no one's looking. You climb a small stairway and peer out from a window overlooking the city. Paris stretches before you, like a patchwork of smoke and rooftops. Somewhere down there, bakers are waking, lighting ovens and pretending the rules make sense. Below, a guard calls out that one shipment is missing a seal. The supervisor curses. The tension in the air thickens like dough gone wrong. You realize that this building, all its ledgers and locks, isn't really about bread. It's about fear, fear of scarcity, fear of hunger, fear of losing control. You step back outside. The morning sun hits your face, bright but cold. The air carries the faint smell of flour and damp wood. A woman selling rolls from a basket calls to you, "Fresh bread, sir, baked before the king could even wake." You buy one, mostly out of admiration for her timing. It's rough, uneven, baked too fast, but honest. She grins. "No inspectors this early," she whispers, and winks. You walk away chewing, crumbs falling onto your cloak. The taste is sharp, slightly bitter, alive. Behind you, the grain warehouse looms, silent, watchful, full of ghosts made of dust and debt. The sun rises a little higher. Somewhere, a baker yawns, a guard sneezes, and the king's breakfast is being arranged on porcelain. Paris begins another day under the rain of bread. By mid-morning, the city has shaken off its sleep. Carriages rattle through puddles, merchants bark over one another, and the air smells of wet straw and the faint perfume of roasted grain drifting from 100 chimneys. You follow the sound of chatter into a narrow lane near Les Innocents, a place where bread and rumor share equal value. A group of bakers have gathered there, aprons gray with soot, arguing beneath a hanging sign that reads, "Pain pour tous, bread for all." The slogan is ambitious. The mood is not. One man gestures with his rolling pin like a sword. "They tell us to bake smaller loaves," he says, "but the mouths keep the same size." The others laugh grimly. You hover at the edge, listening. You follow the lane toward the outskirts, where the smell of flour fades into open air. Fields once surrounded this part of Paris, though now they're shrinking beneath the city's hunger for space. Still, you find a few patches of green where wheat bends in the breeze, and for a moment, you can almost forget the noise behind you. A farmer waves from his cart, his clothes dusted in chaff. "Heading to the city?" he calls. "Just wandering," he chuckles. "Then wander carefully. Paris eats faster than I can harvest." Here's your historical fact. During Louis XV's reign, the transport of grain into Paris was so tightly regulated that farmers needed written permits just to cross the gates. The slightest irregularity, a missing seal, an incorrect weight, could mean confiscation. For many, smuggling became the only way to survive. He gestures toward a second cart, half covered with a tarp. See that? Half of it's hay. The rest's flour I'm not supposed to have. He winks. The city calls it crime. I call it breakfast. You smile, though there's a quiet sadness in his voice. The kind that comes from wrestling the land and the law at once. Then comes your cultural tidbit. Smugglers who brought flour into the city after curfew were known as les blatiers de la nuit, the night grain men. They carried sacks on their backs, whispering passwords to gatekeepers. Some tied bells to their mules, so guards would think they were milkmen. It was, in its way, a nightly ballet of deceit. Historians still debate how much of the illegal grain trade the authorities ignored out of pity or profit. Paris, after all, thrives on selective blindness. The farmer offers you a seat on the cart. You climb aboard, and the horses trudge forward at a sleepy pace. The road winds past small cottages and mill wheels, turning lazily in the stream. Children wave as you pass. One runs barefoot alongside, shouting, "Bring us bread from the king's oven." The farmer laughs. If the king baked it, boy, you wouldn't want it. You roll along in comfortable silence. The air smells of grass and the faint tang of yeast carried from the city behind you. The horizon glows pale blue, the kind of color that promises rain but might change its mind. Sometimes I think the city forgets where its bread begins. The farmer says quietly, all they see are loaves, never the hands that sewed them. You glance at his palms, calloused, cracked, the color of the soil itself. Maybe they'd understand if they came here. He shakes his head. No, they'd regulate the clouds next. You laugh softly. That does sound like them. He nods toward the towers of Paris in the distance. Still, I can't hate it. Every sack I smuggle feeds someone who'd go hungry otherwise. Even a king's city needs its sinners. You ride with him until the road splits. One way back toward the city gates, the other winding into open countryside. You thank him. Stepping down carefully, he raises his hand in farewell. By early afternoon, the air turns heavy again. Clouds crawl across the sky like slow thoughts. You wander into the market district, where baskets of fruit, fish, and bread crowd every stall. It's chaos, but beautiful chaos. The kind that feels alive. Vendors shout prices that shift faster than the wind. Fresh rolls, honest weight. No royal tax here, one woman yells, swatting a pigeon from her cart. She spots you and smiles. You look hungry for something warm and unapproved. You laugh and buy a small loaf wrapped in linen. It's dense, rustic, and still steaming. Where's this from? She lowers her voice. From just outside the walls. Better not ask which side of the law it crossed. Here's your historical fact. Despite the strict grain regulations, a thriving black market for bread operated throughout 18th century Paris. Illegal loaves were cheaper, larger, and often better made than the taxed versions. The authorities knew, of course. But as one inspector famously said, you cannot arrest a hunger. You tear off a piece and chew thoughtfully. It tastes of smoke and defiance with a hint of fennel. Then comes your cultural tidbit. During particularly bad shortages, Parisians invented nicknames for illegal loaves. Les ombres, the shadows, and les clandestins, the hidden ones. Housewives would send children into alleys, whispering, "Ask for the shadow bread." It sounds like poetry now, but it was survival then. Historians still debate how widespread the black market trade truly was. Some claim it fed half the city, others that it was mostly myth, a collective wish kneaded into legend. You stroll through the market, watching people haggle, trade, and laugh in spite of it all. A butcher jokes with a baker. If they tax the air next, we'll all suffocate politely. A street performer balances a baguette on his nose, bowing theatrically each time it wobbles. For the king, he shouts, to laughter from the crowd. Long may he bake in his own laws. You pause near a stall selling herbs and salt. The vendor, an elderly woman with eyes like cracked glass, notices your curiosity. Salt, she says softly, is the only thing they can't counterfeit. It remembers the sea. You buy a pinch just to hear her say that again. She nods approvingly. Add it to your bread before bed. It keeps bad dreams from rising. You pocket the small paper twist of salt. The market hums around you, a living pulse of barter and breath. For a moment, you close your eyes. The sound becomes music. The roll of carts, the hiss of rain returning, laughter under canvas roofs. You can almost feel the heartbeat of Paris through the soles of your shoes. When you open them again, the crowd has shifted. Someone begins to sing, softly, the tune you've been hearing all along, that baker's lullaby. You follow the melody through the stalls until it fades into the distance, as if leading you onward. You walk slower now, full from bread and noise, feeling the weight of the city's hunger settle somewhere between your ribs and your thoughts. The rain begins again, gentle this time, steady, like the whisper of dough rising behind a closed oven door. And once more, Paris exhales. Rain beads on your cloak as you make your way south, toward the Latin Quarter. The city's restless mind, always thinking, always arguing, always just a little hungry. The streets here smell of parchment, candle wax, and whetstone. You pass students huddled beneath shared umbrellas, their books tucked under their arms like contraband dreams. You slip into a narrow cafe where the ceiling hangs low and the air feels thick with thought. Candles gutter on every table, their wax pooling like miniature landscapes. A group of philosophers sit in the corner, debating bread as if it were a moral question, which, in 18th century Paris, it practically was. Here is your historical fact. In the late 1760s, debates about the bread question became a major topic among French intellectuals. Philosophers and economists, the physiocrats, argued that grain trade should be free from royal interference, that supply and demand, not decrees, should feed the people. The idea was radical, dangerous, and, depending on whom you asked, either salvation or madness. You sit nearby, pretending to study the damp edge of your sleeve, while listening. The king must control the grain, insists one man, tapping his cup. Without oversight, the greedy will hoard, and the people will starve. Another snorts. And with oversight, the greedy wear crowns. The table murmurs. Then comes your obscure tidbit. One pamphlet from that era claimed that bread shortages were a divine examination of patience, suggesting that hunger purified the soul. You can almost hear Paris laughing bitterly at that. Historians still debate whether such pamphlets were serious theology or dark humor disguised as faith. Either way, you can't imagine they made anyone less hungry. The waiter passes, placing a small loaf beside your drink. It's simple, coarse, unsweetened. You break it apart and share a piece with a stray cat that's wandered in to escape the rain. The cat eats quickly, tail twitching like a metronome. One of the philosophers notices and raises his cup to you. Feed one, and you'll have 10 by tomorrow. he says. Cats are beggars. Paris breeds both. You nod. At least cats don't argue about grain tariffs. He laughs, perhaps louder than the joke deserves. Then they're wiser than us. You stay a while longer, letting the talk flow around you like warm water. Arguments rise and fall. Words about fairness, fate, and flour swirl in the candlelight. You realize that the city's hunger isn't only for food, it's for meaning. Outside, the rain slows to a drizzle. You finish your bread, pay your coin, and step back into the street. The sky above the rooftops glows gray-blue, heavy but forgiving. You walk past the college gates, where students whisper plans to change the world, and wonder whether they'll start with words or with ovens. You turn a corner and find yourself once more near the river. It moves quietly beneath the bridges, carrying with it 1,000 crumbs of conversation. You pause, watching them drift away. Evening returns, with the calm of a well-timed breath. The sky over Paris burns faintly orange at the edges, fading into the smoke of hearths and ovens. You cross the Pont Neuf, where lamps flicker to life, one by one, and street performers gather to chase the last light. You stop to listen to a fiddler playing near the bridge's end. His tune is soft, wistful, that same melody again, the lullaby of the bakers. You wonder if the entire city hums it in its sleep. A girl sells roasted chestnuts nearby. Warm bread for the heart, she calls, though her basket holds none. You buy a handful and let the heat soak into your palms. Here's your historical fact. Street food became increasingly common in 18th century Paris, especially during bread shortages. When loaves grew scarce or expensive, people turned to chestnuts, pancakes, and roasted grains. Small comforts that filled more than bellies. They filled the quiet between complaints. The girl watches you eat. They say chestnuts are the poor man's loaf, she says, but they taste sweeter when you call them that. You smile. Maybe the poor are just better cooks, she laughs softly. Don't let the inspectors hear. Then comes your obscure tidbit. In the cold months, Parisians believed chestnuts brought good dreams if eaten before sleep. Some even tucked one under their pillow to ward off hunger spirits, a practice priests called ridiculous and nearly pagan. Historians still debate whether this superstition began in the countryside or in the crowded attics of the city's poorest. But you think of the farmer from before, and the baker, and the old woman selling salt, and realize it doesn't matter. Hope travels the same path as hunger. The fiddler's song slows, then stops. The last notes hang in the air like the smell of smoke. People clap politely. Coins clink into a hat. The chestnut girl hums the same tune under her breath. You lean against the bridge railing, looking out over the Seine. Reflections of lamplight ripple across the water, breaking apart, reforming, breaking again. Across the river, you see the faint glow of bakeries beginning their night work. The rhythm continues, dough rising, ovens sighing, bread transforming in secret heat. You imagine all those invisible hands shaping tomorrow. Before it arrives, you take another chestnut, bite gently, and let the warmth fill your mouth. The flavor is earthy, humble, the kind that demands no applause. Somewhere in the city, a bell rings to mark the hour. You've stopped keeping track of which one. Time, like bread, feels softer here. You close your eyes for a moment. The wind moves through your hair, carrying the scent of ash, river water, and the faint sweetness of grain. And for the first time tonight, Paris feels like it might forgive itself. The next morning wakes you gently, not with the bustle of merchants or the hammer of carts, but with the soft crackle of a bakery coming to life. You've drifted somehow into a quiet street near the Marais, where the air smells of smoke, milk, and freshly kindled fire. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, probably confused about how many centuries it's been doing this. The shutters creak open one by one. A cat darts across the cobblestones, tail high and dignified, and you, still half dreaming, wander toward the scent that could pull the living from their graves. Warm bread and butter melting together. The bakery here is small, its sign faded, its door already ajar. A young woman behind the counter hums a tune. Yes, that same lullaby again, though now it feels more like an awakening. She glances up and smiles. You're early. Couldn't sleep, you admit. She nods knowingly. Then you'll want the first loaf. It's the only honest one. It hasn't learned to lie yet. You grin at that and watch as she pulls a golden round from the oven with practiced grace. The crust sighs, the air steams, and for a moment you can almost hear the sound of gratitude. Here's your historical fact. By the 1770s, Parisian bakers began introducing enriched doughs, adding milk, eggs, or butter when they could afford to. These richer breads were often reserved for Sundays or feasts, but many bakers quietly baked them more often for their neighbors who'd had a hard week. A small rebellion, one crumb at a time. The woman sets the loaf on the counter. It's called pain bénit. Blessed bread, she says softly. The priest blesses it on Sundays. But I think the real blessing is that it exists at all. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Parisians believed that sharing the first slice of a freshly baked loaf could heal arguments. Neighbors would visit one another after quarrels, tear the crust, dip it in salt, and eat it together. They called it faire la paix du pain, to make peace with bread. Historians still debate whether this custom began in the monasteries or in ordinary homes. But either way, it feels like something humanity should have kept. You take the first slice, still hot enough to sting your fingertips, and taste it. It's soft, rich, almost too gentle for this world. You'll need something to drink, she says, pouring a small cup of warm milk. Bread talks better with company. You nod and sit by the window as the city stirs awake outside. The sun creeps along the street, turning puddles into gold. The baker moves quietly behind you, arranging her loaves for the day. Her hands work with a calm precision, not hurried, not proud, just sure. You realize that this is what power looks like, though it never wears a crown. When you leave, she presses a small roll into your hand. For the road, she says. If it goes stale, that's on you, not me. You thank her. Outside, the morning smells brighter than it has in days. You tear the roll in half, watching steam curl upward into the cold air, and think, maybe peace, like bread, only stays warm if you share it. By afternoon, the streets hum again. Carriages splash through puddles. Vendors argue over prices, and the sound of knives on cutting boards echoes from every open window. You wander toward the Palais Royal, the glittering heart of Parisian spectacle, where nobles gossip in gardens, while children chase pigeons between marble columns. It feels like another world. Perfume instead of flour, silk instead of soot. You half expect to see Louis XV himself appear, perhaps disguised as he sometimes did. wandering the streets to gauge his people's mood, though history suggests he preferred to imagine their happiness rather than witness their hunger. Here's your historical fact. Louis XV was known for his obsession with control, particularly over Paris's food supply. He often ordered secret reports on bread prices, fearing unrest. One such report claimed, "The people's stomach is the throne's barometer." You wonder if anyone ever told him that his barometer was cracking. As you pass through the gardens, you overhear courtiers discussing the flower police, the inspectors who check bakeries for weight and price compliance. One laughs, fanning herself lazily. Can you imagine? Counting loaves all day. I'd rather count jewels, her companion smirks. The difference, madame, is that bread goes stale. She laughs, light and sharp as sugar glass. You can't help but notice how their words crumble in the air, delicate and useless. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Louis XV once hosted an extravagant bread banquet to prove his generosity, inviting nobles to dine on every variety of loaf baked across France. Yet not a single baker was invited. The bread was sliced by servants who weren't allowed to eat it. Historians still debate whether the story is exaggerated or entirely true, but either way, it feels like a parable too obvious to invent. You walk past a fountain where pigeons dip their beaks into the water. A street boy nearby sells small scraps of leftover pastry to passing nobles' dogs. Only the best for the king's creatures, he calls. No one laughs, but several coins still drop into his hand, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of habit. The contrast between the palace gardens and the bakeries you've seen feels almost obscene. Yet even here, you smell bread, not from the royal kitchens, but from a small cart at the garden's edge. A woman sells rolls to servants, guards, and anyone brave enough to step out of the perfume cloud. You buy one, more for curiosity than hunger. She smiles faintly. Don't tell them, she says, nodding toward the nobles. But this bread came from the same oven as theirs. You take a bite. It's light, buttery, familiar. The difference isn't taste, it's permission. You thank her and sit beneath a tree to eat in peace. Around you, laughter ripples, fountains splash, birds scatter crumbs meant for dogs. You finish the roll, brush the crumbs from your lap, and look up at the gilded windows of the palace. Somewhere beyond them, the king is likely finishing a dessert worth more than the baker's week. You imagine he enjoys it without tasting, as if pleasure were a formality. And as the sun lowers, the air fills once more with the sound of the city exhaling, the creak of shutters closing, the clatter of carts returning, and faintly, always faintly, that familiar lullaby rising from the streets, the song of the bread. Night glides back over Paris, smooth and deliberate, like ink spilling across a page. The streets near the Palais Royal shimmer with lamplight reflected in puddles. Somewhere, a carriage wheel snaps against a cobblestone, and the horse snorts in protest. The scent of rain mixes with that faint, unkillable perfume of yeast, Paris's true signature. You wander down a quieter street, where the noise of gossip fades into the hush of home life. Windows glow faintly, small theaters of evening routine. A woman cuts bread for soup, a man mends a coat, children whisper secrets beneath a blanket. For a city so large, Paris feels strangely intimate at night, like it's leaning in to listen to itself. You pass a bakery whose door stands half open. The baker inside A broad man with tired eyes leans against the counter, watching the flames in his oven. He glances up as you approach. "You're out late," he says. "So are you." He smiles faintly. "My bread's a slow thinker, needs company." Here's your historical fact. In 1774, the year before Louis XV's death, Parisian bakers began facing harsher inspections, not for quality, but for speed. The crown demanded faster output to control prices, but bread made too quickly grew dense and bitter. Paris grumbled quietly that even the loaves now tasted of bureaucracy. The baker gestures for you to come closer. He opens the oven door slightly. Inside, the dough rises unevenly, straining against the heat. "See that?" he says. "They call it progress. I call it impatience." Then comes your obscure tidbit. Bakers had a term for dough that refused to rise after being rushed. Pain, fâché, angry bread. They'd mutter apologies to it, as if it might forgive them for hurrying. Historians still debate whether this phrase was just metaphor or a true superstition. But here, in the flicker of the firelight, it feels almost holy, an acknowledgement that even bread needs its dignity. The baker hands you a half loaf, still warm but imperfect. "Try it," he says. You bite. The crust is too hard, the crumb uneven, but it's honest. And somehow that honesty tastes better than perfection. He shrugs. "They say the king controls every loaf. Let him. I just bake them." Control's not the same as creation. You nod, watching the shadows shift on the oven wall. "Do you ever rest?" He grins. "I rest when the bread does." Outside, the bells toll softly. 1, 2, 3. The hour bends around you like a sigh. You thank the baker and step into the street again, clutching the half loaf. The night air is cool. The moon caught in a puddle, like a coin waiting to be spent. The city feels suspended, not awake, not asleep, but breathing, steady as a heartbeat. You take one last bite before moving on. It's better now, cooled slightly, the anger's gone out of it. The next morning greets you not with sunlight, but with fog. Paris feels muted, wrapped in linen. Its edges soften like dough before baking. The streets are quieter. Even the pigeons seem contemplative. You follow the muffled sound of a bell until you find yourself outside a convent near the Rue Saint-Honoré. The gates are open, and the smell that drifts through them is unmistakable. Sugar, butter, and prayer. A nun in a pale apron waves you in. "You look hungry," she says, with the kind of certainty only nuns and grandmothers possess. Inside, the air is thick with sweetness. Trays of pastries cool on long wooden tables. Other nuns move silently, folding dough, sprinkling sugar, humming soft hymns that sound suspiciously like that same baker's lullaby. Here's your historical fact. Many Parisian convents produced bread and pastries for sale, using the profits to fund hospitals and orphanages. Some recipes were guarded like relics, passed down through generations of silent kitchens. One convent was so famous for its almond pastries that visiting nobles demanded royal deliveries. Sanctified luxury. The nun offers you a small roll glazed with honey. "We bake for the body," she says, "but pray for the appetite." You bite gently. It's perfect. Crisp outside, tender inside, faintly perfumed with rose water. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Convent bakers were known for marking their loaves with tiny crosses. not just for holiness, but to let the steam escape peacefully. They called it giving the bread its blessing. Historians still debate whether the practice began for spiritual reasons or practical ones, but here, surrounded by warmth and quiet industry, it feels like both. You watch as one of the younger nuns kneads dough with surprising strength. "We pray with our hands," she says, when she notices you watching. Faith is just muscle memory. You nod, unsure whether she's joking or profound. Probably both. The Mother Superior appears, tall and serene, holding a basket of golden loaves. "We send these to the orphanage," she explains. "Sometimes, the children write us letters about their dreams after eating them, always about feasts." Her smile is small, bittersweet. If bread can give a child one good dream, then it's worth more than any sermon. You help her carry a basket to the doorway. Outside, the fog lifts slightly. The bells of Saint-Honoré toll the hour, their sound soft and round. You thank the sisters, pocketing one of the honey rolls for the road, though you suspect they knew you would. As you leave, you glance back at the courtyard, the oven smoke curling upward, the nuns moving like calm waves of fabric and faith. For a city obsessed with control, this place feels strangely free. And somewhere in the distance, a baker's song rises again, carried by the wind, blending with prayer, indistinguishable now from devotion itself. By midday, the city is buzzing again, a tangle of shouts, wheels, laughter, and quarrels all kneaded together into one great dough of noise. The fog has burned away, revealing a pale blue sky stretched thin above the rooftops. The smell of bread, always bread, threads through it all, rising from doorways and courtyards, a kind of civic incense. You follow a group of boys hauling empty baskets through the Rue du Temple. They move quickly, calling out greetings to bakers, collecting the unsold loaves from the morning round. Curious, you ask one where they're headed. "To the Halles," he says, proudly, "for the day's second bake. We trade the old for the new." The Halles, the beating stomach of Paris. You quicken your pace to follow. Here's your historical fact. Les Halles, known as the Belly of Paris, was a massive marketplace where all food for the city was traded, including bread, grain, and flour. By Louis XV's time, it had grown into a labyrinth of stalls, warehouses, and ovens. Every loaf, legal or otherwise, passed through its influence somehow. When you arrive, it's chaos in full bloom. Carts creak, horses snort, and vendors shout numbers like incantations. The air is thick with flour dust and the smell of yeast, onions, and life itself. It's overwhelming and wonderful. You watch a woman balancing a tray of rolls on her head as if defying gravity. "Make way," she calls. "The king may control the bread, but I control the balance." The crowd laughs. Then comes your obscure tidbit. To guard against cheating, market officials here once used an iron loaf mold called la taille du roi, the king's measure. Every baker's bread was compared to it for weight and size. Those who failed the test were fined or publicly mocked, but over time, the mold became a joke. Bakers whispered that it shrank each year as the king's patience grew shorter. Historians still debate whether the mold truly changed or whether bakers exaggerated the story out of spite. Probably both. You weave through the maze of stalls, pausing at a table where a man sells what he claims is freedom flour. milled in secret mills beyond the tax collector's reach. You can taste the liberty, he says, with the grin of a man who's told this joke far too many times. A group of women gather nearby, kneading dough for sale. One of them hums. Yes, that tune again, the same lullaby of bread, now blending with laughter and the rhythm of work. You help one woman lift a sack of flour, and she thanks you with a scrap of bread torn from her own loaf. Not perfect, she says, but it knows who made it. You take a bite. It's rough, smoky, alive with effort. As the day wears on, the market softens. Voices drop. The heat of the ovens fades. You wander toward the edges, where the leftover bread is stacked for the poor. Children gather there, waiting patiently for their turn. A baker in a red scarf hands out half loaves, one by one, never looking anyone in the eye. You stand and watch. No speech. No charity parade. Just quiet necessity. When the baskets are empty, he wipes his hands on his apron and sighs. Tomorrow, he says to no one in particular, we'll bake again. You walk away, the noise of the halles fading behind you. Paris's stomach may be full for now, but you can feel it. The hunger never really sleeps. Evening comes with a golden edge, the kind of light that makes even the gutters look romantic. You find yourself crossing into the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, a district where bakers and millers live side by side. The smell of flour is thicker here. Not pleasant exactly, but honest, like truth, before it's cleaned up for company. You hear singing before you see its source. A group of millers sit outside their workshop, their white clothes turned gray with dust, mugs of cider in hand. They sing a working song, low, rhythmic, content in its monotony. You stop to listen, smiling. One of them waves you over. Sit, stranger. Bread's nothing without flour, and flour's nothing without music. You sit. Someone hands you a mug. It tastes like apples and fatigue. Here's your historical fact. Millers in 18th century France held a complicated place in society, both essential and distrusted, because they controlled the grinding of grain. Many were accused of skimming flour or manipulating weights. Some were honest, most were not, and all were assumed guilty. The eldest among them, a man with shoulders broad as a barn door, grins. They call us thieves, he says, but it's not stealing if the wind helps. You raise an eyebrow. The wind? He points to the hill behind him, where the silhouette of a windmill cuts across the sunset. It decides how much we grind. Some days it's generous, others it's asleep. We just take what it gives. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Millers believed their mills were alive. They named them, sang to them, even dressed them for holidays, tying ribbons to the sails so they'd dance for the harvest. One Parisian mill was called La Bavarde, the gossip, because its turning sails seemed to chatter all day long. Historians still debate whether these customs were superstition or just weary affection for noisy machinery, but you can see it now. Men depending on the wind, like lovers, depending on moods. The youngest miller, barely out of boyhood, leans forward. My father said flour remembers, he says. Every grain carries what it saw in the field. Rain, sun, even anger. You smile. So bread is a biography, he nods. And we're just editors. The group laughs softly. The sun dips behind the rooftops, setting the sails aglow for one brief, impossible moment. It's so beautiful that no one speaks. The only sound is the slow creak of the mill turning, the wooden rhythm matching the rise and fall of the city's breath. Finally, the eldest man stands. "We'll grind again at dawn," he says. "If the wind's kind." You thank them and begin to walk back toward the city. Behind you, their laughter fades into the hum of the mill. Ahead, Paris glows faintly in the twilight. A loaf, half baked, half broken, still rising in its own strange way. You think about everything you've seen: the baker's patience, the smuggler's wit, the convent's quiet grace, all these people working, praying, risking, singing, just to make sure the city eats. And you realize something simple, something soft as flour dust on your sleeve. The story of Paris isn't about kings or decrees. It's about hands. Hands that knead, that steal, that bless, that share. The same hands that built the city, one loaf at a time, pale and blue, brushing the rooftops with the faint promise of rain. You find yourself wandering north toward Montmartre, where the air smells cleaner, freer. The streets here still remember the countryside. They slope gently upward, lined with gardens, small vineyards, and the lazy creak of windmills in the distance. Montmartre, the hill of mills, long before it became a haven for painters and poets. It was the lungs of Paris's bread. Flour drifted through these streets like snow once, clinging to the clothes of millers and children alike. You climb slowly, your breath matching the rhythm of the turning sails above. The city stretches below, a pale sea of rooftops, domes, and chimneys. You pause halfway up to catch your breath and watch the sunrise spill over the horizon, soft as milk poured from a jug. Here's your historical fact. In the 18th century, Montmartre housed more than 30 working mills, supplying most of Paris's flour. Each was privately owned, yet all depended on royal grain policy, a reminder that even the wind bowed to the king. As you reach the top, a miller waves from his post. "Early for a visitor," he calls, his voice cheerful but worn. "Looking for work or just the view?" "Maybe both," you reply. He laughs and gestures you closer. The sails of his mill turn lazily, sighing as they pass. The structure moans with age, but stands firm like an old soldier, telling stories to the sky. He invites you inside. The mill is a cathedral of wood and motion, beams groaning, gears grinding, flour shimmering in the light like drifting ghosts. The air tastes of wheat and sweat and time. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Millers often carried a pouch of flour from their first grind of the year, believing it brought luck and steadiness to their hands. Some sprinkled a pinch in their wine before drinking, a toast to the wind's mercy. Historians still debate whether this was a tradition or just another excuse for superstition. But it feels fitting. You can't run a city on logic alone. The miller watches the gears spin. "Every grain's a life," he says. "You grind too fast, you waste it. Grind too slow, and the city starves." You nod, realizing how thin the line between art and survival really is. He pours you a handful of warm flour. Feel that. That's the breath of Paris, before it's trapped in crust. You rub it between your fingers. Fine. Dry. Soft. It's like holding sunlight. He grins. "Exactly. That's why I never wash it off." You leave him to his work and step outside again. The wind is picking up, setting the sails spinning faster. They creak and groan, a language older than words. Below, the city glimmers, vast and hungry, waiting for its daily miracle. You think Paris doesn't worship gods, it worships bread, and perhaps, in a quiet way, the wind too. By afternoon, you're back within the city walls, where the streets pulse with their usual rhythm. Wheels rattling, dogs barking, a dozen different melodies of life colliding at once. You follow the sound of laughter and find yourself near a riverside fair where vendors sell trinkets, fried pastries, and cheap wine to anyone with a coin and a stomach. The smell of sugar and oil thickens the air. Children chase each other with sticks of spun sugar, faces smeared in sweetness. A man juggles apples beside a puppet booth where the show's villain, a pompous king with a bread crown, keeps losing his head to applause. You laugh. Paris has always known how to mock itself. Here's your historical fact. Public fairs in 18th century Paris were not only for entertainment, but for news. Songs, plays, and street performances often carried political satire disguised as comedy. Bread, taxes, and royal decrees all became punchlines, safer to laugh at in rhyme than in speech. You stop at a small stall where an old woman sells fried dough, balls rolled in honey, beignets du roi, she calls. Eat what His Majesty forbids. You buy two. They're hot, sticky, dangerously comforting. She smiles. We used to call them beignets des pauvres, she says. Same recipe, different courage. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Some bakers' wives sold leftover dough at fairs, fried into shapes resembling coins or crowns. They said whoever ate one would own their hunger for a day. Historians still debate whether the practice began as mockery or marketing. Probably both, since Parisians never waste a chance to mix rebellion with dessert. A small crowd gathers near a makeshift stage. A troupe performs a farce about a baker arrested for selling loaves too light. In the end, the baker escapes by disguising himself as a bishop and blessing his own bread. The audience roars with laughter. Even the city guards, watching from a distance, pretend not to smile. You watch, amused but moved. Humor here feels like survival, a yeast that keeps the spirit from collapsing. A young girl offers you a paper cone of roasted grain, still warm. They say if you eat this before sunset, she whispers, you'll dream of endless harvests. You take a handful, chewing slowly. The flavor is nutty, earthy, the taste of resilience. As the sun lowers, the fair glows under lantern light. Music drifts from somewhere. Fiddles, tambourines, feet stomping in rhythm. You stand at the edge of it all, smiling. For once, no one seems worried about grain laws or royal prices. Just people, eating, laughing, existing. Maybe this is what freedom smells like. Sugar, smoke, and something frying just out of sight. A gust of wind off the river flickers the lanterns. The crowd cheers as the final puppet bows, and for a heartbeat, Paris forgets its hunger. You slip away quietly, the taste of honey still clinging to your fingers, the laughter fading behind you like a lullaby, reimagined as joy. The night hums low and warm. The city exhales again, and somewhere, unseen but steady, the ovens begin to glow. The next day breaks with a quiet confidence, the kind that belongs to cities that have survived worse. The clouds are thin and fast-moving, the kind of sky that looks undecided. You follow the sound of a river barge moaning against its ropes. and find yourself by the Quai de la Râpée, where the flower boats unload their cargo. It's an oddly elegant chaos. Men shout over the slap of water, hauling sacks of grain from hull to shore. Each bag bursts with a pale dust that coats the air, the clothes, even the river itself. The Seine shimmers under a faint veil of flour. The city baptized again in what sustains it. You stand beside a dock worker, watching. His arms are like rope, his voice like gravel, soaked in wine. Beautiful, isn't it? He says. Until you sneeze. Here's your historical fact. Paris imported much of its grain by river, stored first in granaries along the Seine, before being distributed to the city's mills. The system was efficient in theory, but vulnerable in practice. Floods, corruption, or a single broken lock could throw off the city's entire supply chain. You help him steady a barrel rolling loose. What happens if the grain doesn't arrive? He laughs. Then the bakers curse the millers curse the wind, and the king blames the weather. The people? They just go hungry. You nod. A perfect system. He grins. Exactly. Then comes your obscure tidbit. To prevent theft, the crown sometimes mixed blue powder into royal grain shipments, a harmless dye that marked stolen sacks. But enterprising smugglers simply sifted it out with sieves made from horsehair, selling the cleansed flour as pain loyal or loyal bread. Historians still debate whether the blue flour trick ever truly worked. Some say it was real policy, others, a moral fable about the futility of control. Either way, it sounds like Paris. Clever, absurd, and just superstitious enough to be true. The dock worker wipes his brow, leaving streaks of white on his skin. We feed the city, you know, he says. But nobody thanks us. They only remember us when the bread goes bad. He shrugs. That's all right. I don't need statues, just a crust. You stay a while, watching the workers move in rhythm, lifting, shouting, loading again. It's not graceful, but it's steady, and somehow that steadiness feels sacred. When the last barge empties, the men collapse by the water's edge, eating bread so dense it could dent a table. One breaks his in half and offers you a piece. Dockman's lunch, he says. Hard as life, but it keeps you standing. You take a bite. It's rough, salty from the air, but satisfying. The river rolls on, carrying crumbs toward the sea. You look downstream and imagine all the loaves those grains will become, all the hands that will touch them, slice them, share them, fight over them. It's strange, you think, how much a city's peace depends on something so soft. By evening, the air turns warm and still. Paris feels exhausted, as if the day's noise has drained it dry. You wander through the quieter neighborhoods near the Bastille, where the smell of baking lingers long after the ovens have cooled. The streets are empty, except for a few cats and a child dragging a wooden hoop. The light has that late, amber softness that makes everything look kind, even the cracked walls. You pass a baker, locking his shutters for the night. Closed already? You ask. He chuckles. For customers, yes. For dough, never. He gestures toward the back of his shop, where small mounds rest under linen. Tomorrow's bread, he says, sleeping. Here's your historical fact. By the late 1770s, bakers often prepared dough overnight to meet morning demand, a practice that turned their lives nocturnal. They lived in half-sleep, governed by the rhythm of fermentation, a kind of quiet servitude to time and yeast. The baker leans against his doorframe, looking tired but proud. You ever listen to dough rise? He asks. You smile. Not on purpose. He nods toward the linen-covered mounds. It makes a sound, small, like breathing. My father used to say, it's the bread's soul coming alive. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Some bakers kept a lump of old dough, called levain de famille, passed down through generations. They treated it like an heirloom, feeding it daily, protecting it from mold, never letting it die. If a bakery burned, the first thing saved wasn't the cash box, but the starter. Historians still debate how many Parisian families maintained their levain for centuries, but a few claim theirs has never missed a day's breath since Louis XV. You listen, and in the hush between your words, you think you almost hear it. A faint whisper, soft and slow, like bubbles surfacing in cream. The baker smiles. They say the king rules bread, he murmurs. But this, he nods toward the dough. This rules time. He lights a candle, sets it beside the covered loaves, and bows his head for a brief moment. Not prayer exactly, but respect. You mimic the gesture without quite knowing why. Outside, the first stars appear above the rooftops. The city darkens, window by window, like embers cooling. Somewhere, a dog barks, then quiets. You take your leave. The baker waves lazily. Walk safe, he calls. And if you dream of bread, let it rise slowly. The street feels warm under your feet. You walk without hurry, the air thick with scent. Smoke, yeast, the faint sweetness of flour in every crevice. For a moment, you stop and turn back. Through the shop's window, you see the candle still flickering beside the resting dough, like a tiny sun keeping vigil. And you realize Paris never truly sleeps. It just proofs overnight. Morning again, slow, golden, merciful. The first light glides along the Seine like liquid honey, catching on rooftops and chimney smoke. You wake to the familiar rhythm. Carts creaking, shutters opening, pigeons announcing nothing in particular. The scent of baking drifts through the air, patient and persuasive, the heartbeat of the city. You follow it. It leads you through winding alleys where children play with bread crusts like toys, where cats steal cooling rolls from windowsills, and where bakers hum to themselves without realizing they're singing. Paris feels softer now, almost at peace, as though the city, like its bread, has finally risen. At the corner of Rue Saint-Denis, you find an old man sitting beside a cart stacked with yesterday's loaves. He's feeding crumbs to the pigeons, smiling faintly. They pay in company, he says, when he sees you. You sit beside him. Here's your historical fact. In 1774, just before Louis XV's death, bread prices reached their highest level in decades. The city simmered, quietly furious. But the real revolt hadn't yet begun. It would take another decade, another king, and another famine to set it ablaze. The old man tears off another crust. I was a baker once, he says. Worked in the royal kitchens. They wanted perfection. Bread that looked like marble and smelled like music. I left. Too quiet there. He hands you a piece. It's hard, cold, but honest. Then comes your obscure tidbit. Some bakers swore that pigeons could sense when a loaf was made with stolen flour. They'd refuse to eat it, whether true or not. Parisians took it as divine justice. Even the birds know guilt when they taste it. Historians still debate whether that story began with superstition or satire. You suspect it was both. The man chuckles softly. Funny thing, bread, he says. It never lies. You rush it, it tells on you. You cheat it collapses. You love it forgives you. You nod, holding the crust between your fingers. Seems fairer than kings. He grins, eyes glinting. That's why kings fear it. The sun climbs higher, the light warming the river. The pigeons scatter suddenly, startled by a passing cart stacked with sacks of flour. The driver calls out cheerfully, "Make way for tomorrow's peace treaty." You laugh. Paris, it seems, still negotiates in loaves. The old man rises slowly. "I'll go feed the rest by the bridge," he says. "Someone has to keep them company." You watch him walk away, his silhouette framed by sunlight and smoke. The pigeons follow like disciples. You stay a moment longer, feeling the crust soften slightly in your hand. Then you take one last bite, dry, humble, alive, and let the crumbs fall to the cobblestones. The city is already sweeping them up for the next meal. The night deepens. The bells fall silent, one by one, until all you hear is the soft hiss of wind along the riverbanks and the faint crackle of ovens cooling across Paris. You walk slower now, every sound drawn out, every step a little heavier, not with fatigue, but with fullness. The air feels warm against your face, carrying the scent of ashes, milk, and the last loaves of the day. You imagine the city sleeping beneath it, dreams perfumed with flour, children dreaming of feasts, bakers dreaming of quiet, even kings, perhaps, dreaming of control they never really had. You stop before a bakery whose window still glows with the faint amber of dying fire. Inside, a loaf rests alone on a wooden board. The superstition bread, waiting for luck, or perhaps forgiveness. You stand there for a long while, listening to the silence breathe, and for the first time, the city feels utterly still. No carts, no bells, no complaints, just warmth and rest and the hum of something ancient and kind. You take a deep breath. The scent of wheat, wood, and smoke fills your lungs. It feels like the memory of home, even if it never was. Tomorrow, the city will wake again. The ovens will roar, the flour will rise, and 1,000 hands will repeat the quiet miracle of bread. But for now, everything is calm. You close your eyes, let the air settle. Somewhere, faintly, someone hums that lullaby one last time. The tune that carried you through every street, every crumb, every sigh of Paris. You smile. The song fades, and the city, still warm from its ovens, finally falls asleep.